All right, chemistry. Let's finish up our lecture on the Pledge of Allegiance. We need to talk about the origin, because one of your goals, one of your objectives for this is summarize the origin of the Pledge of Allegiance. So the Pledge of Allegiance was actually originally written by a man named Francis Bellamy. Francis Bellamy was employed by a magazine distributor. This was technically a children's magazine. It was distributed with the intention of being a resource used in schools to help students learn to read. Francis Bellamy, at a particular point, was charged with trying to sell more American flags. Now, I do want to stop here because we're talking about the mid to late 1800s. We're talking about a time where a lot of students assumed that there was a large amount of patriotism, that kind of more stereotypical America type patriotism going on. That's not really the case. And I'd like to point out that Francis Bellamy was a Socialist Party member. Now, I'm not saying that's anything super important, but I'd like to point out that there was a Socialist Party member. By today's standards, it would usually be painted as less of that kind of overt, over-the-top, in-your-face patriotism. But this was the person that was charged with trying to sell more American flags. I just happen to think that's kind of interesting given today's climate. Now, it comes to 1892, and it's a big year because that's the 400-year anniversary of the Americas being discovered by Christopher Columbus. Now, this is a celebration year. Francis Bellamy's magazine was releasing special issues, and he saw this as a good opportunity to attempt to sell more of these American flags that he was trying to sell. But here's the thing. 1892 is about 30 years after the conclusion of the Civil War. This is fairly important as far as Francis Bellamy is concerned because of the climate at that time. You might not be aware, but typically, generally speaking, in times of crisis, in times especially of war, patriotism, national love, national pride really skyrockets during the time of the crisis and the time immediately following the crisis. Now, after there's been a certain amount of time elapsed after the crisis, there's a period of disillusionment, if you've heard that term used before, and that happens after almost every major conflict where the kind of the stimulus of national pride and patriotism starts to wear off, and you really just are left with the pain of the losses that you've incurred through that crisis. And so patriotism typically after a time takes a real large dip. And around this time, after the Civil War, that dip has occurred. Patriotism was maybe not at an all-time low, but very, very low point. And Francis Bellamy had a personal concern for this. And it was very personal because in personal journals, he was shown to be addressing his wife named Mary. Mary, if I can instill into the minds of our American youth a love for their country and the principles on which it was founded, and create in them an ambition to carry on with the ideals which the early founders wrote into the Constitution, I shall not have lived in vain. And so this was a deep-seated desire for Francis Bellamy to raise the level of patriotism in the country. And the only group of people that he really had any influence on or potential to have influence on would be student-age kids. So in this special edition of this magazine that was released and distributed, Francis Bellamy suggested, and this was not required in any way, shape, or form. You got to realize it was more in the form of, hey, teachers, why don't you try this? This could, up the morale of your classroom. Try this. And he suggested a salute, right? A pledge of allegiance. And he went through the procedure. He came up with an actual physical salute from what you physically do. Right now in classes, we use the hand over the heart salute, but that's not actually the original salute. The original salute, as designated by Bellamy, was actually called the Roman salute, used in Roman times. And you've seen this before, and I'll show you a picture of it here in a moment. But it was later called the Bellamy Salute. Now, the reason we don't use this salute anymore is because the exact same motion, the hand motion, was later adopted by Italy and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, a.k.a. the Nazi Party. So, at the time, those were not two groups that the United States wanted their young people to be emulating, so they simply changed the salute to what we now know as the salute for the Pledge of Allegiance, that kind of hand-over heart salute. And this happened in 1942. I'm sure you guys already recognize it's around the time of World War II. So this is the Roman salute. It's a hand extended, okay, the right arm extended, with the palm oriented so that it faces whatever you are saluting. And so I have pictures of 3 different people here. Obviously, everyone recognizes Adolf Hitler. Now, he is elevated above the soldiers that he is saluting right now, and so his palm is actually oriented a little bit down. That's because he's elevated. We see over on the right, those arms are saluting at different angles. That's because the object that they're saluting are different locations relative to their body. So what this would look like originally is the students would elevate their right arm and then orient their right palm, so that it was towards the flag. And this was the salute. This became known as the Bellamy Salute. This was a normal thing. It was a normal thing. This particular picture has been used in recent years to kind of denote some sort of brainwashing or mass national conspiracy. That's just not, it's simply incorrect. This was the original Pledge of Allegiance. The only reason we associate this with something negative is what happened preceding and during World War II. So before the 1930s, this was perfectly acceptable. No one would have thought twice about this motion. And so what we see today is anything that slightly resembles this Roman salute we associate with Nazism, okay, with Adolf Hitler. And it's a little bit too much, a little bit too far. It's not what this particular person was going for. It was not the point. And this particular person, in my opinion, should not be criticized for this particular pose. Now we're going to move on to changes in the Pledge of Allegiance, because the Pledge of Allegiance that you said today is not the original version. There actually have been a couple of changes, and we'll go through those. So the very first version that was ever written by Francis Bellamy was, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." Now that was the first inked version, but in the first couple of years, about the first 30 years, it was, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the republic for which it stands." It changed to a colon there instead of a comma, just a little bit of shopkeeping there. And then in 1923, it was changed, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all." And then in 1924, there was another quick change. Okay, that change only lasted for about a year. "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America." The of America was added, "and to the republic for which it stands," and the rest of it. And then the most recent change happened in 1954. "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God." That was added in 1954. And to be honest, that's probably the largest controversy that goes along with the Pledge of Allegiance to date. So let's talk about why these changes were actually put into place. So in 1923, to the United States of America, okay, to the flag of the United States of America. Before that, it was just, to my flag. You have to realize at this time, there was a huge immigration into the United States. Hundreds and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, families, were immigrating into the United States. And so immigrant children were coming from different countries. And so you have a child who, with all intents and purposes, is trying to pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, but they're saying, "my flag." Well, if there's a child that has immigrated to the United States from, Finland, okay, that kid's flag is the Finnish flag. And so to be more specific, those words were added so that immigrant children had a little bit more direction in what they're actually thinking about. Now, in 1954 is the other one, the other big change that could take some explaining, the "under God" words. Now, this was first added at a religious meeting, and it was quoting the Gettysburg Address. Now, there's a large controversy about the Gettysburg Address, and the question is, in that original address that Abraham Lincoln gave, did he actually say "under God"? And there actually is quite a bit of a controversy. Some people say that, no, he didn't. Some people say, yes, he did. The fact of the matter is that different manuscripts of that speech have those two words, and certain ones don't. Okay? There is no general consensus on this, so I'm not going to tell you anything that's opinion. Just know that the heart of the debate stems from different manuscripts have those two words. Some manuscripts don't have those words. But this particular group was on the side of, yes, the manuscripts that we think are the accurate ones have those words. So the question, did Lincoln use the phrase under God? Say yes. Now here's the thing. This was a religious, it was a breakfast meeting. It was a religious meeting, and so that makes sense for them. But why did the nation, why did the nation of the United States of America add these words? You have to realize what's happening in 1954. What is the climate around the world? The biggest opponent to the United States and capitalism at the time was communism. Okay, and the thing about communism that is affected here is that communist states sponsor atheism. They force the closure of churches. They would mandate atheism. And so as a capitalist nation, which is essentially, some people might argue, but it's essentially the opposite of, communism is the opposite of capitalism. The United States wanted to draw a stark contrast between themselves and communist or socialist nations. It's like, we're very different from these people. We want to villainize these people in every way we can because we do not want our young people growing up thinking this is a good thing because we think it's a bad thing. And so these two words were added to the pledge in an attempt to really indoctrinate not necessarily students into religion, but into, holy cow, communism is so different from us, and to keep that chasm open and wide. But here's the thing. This phrase, under God, is actually not required to be recited by you in class. Because remember, and if you want to, that's fine. And if you don't want to, that is fine as well. But this does not necessarily confirm the United States as a religious country, because, again, there are amendments in the Constitution that disallow that from happening. This happened during the Cold War. It's a relic, it's an artifact of this capitalism versus communism war that was happening in a simple attempt to combat communism. Okay, so again, this does not necessarily confirm the USA as a theist country. That's why it's still in the Pledge of Allegiance. If it did confirm the United States as a theist country, of course it would be ripped out. Let's move on to the procedure, because we need to be able to list the procedure for the Pledge of Allegiance. First off, you need to stand, because it's a sign of respect. Second, face the flag and remove any non-religious hats. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. But again, that's a sign of respect. And then salute the flag. Why? Because it's a sign of respect. Again, we haven't got to allegiance yet. We're simply respecting the institution at this point. Lastly, you're going to actually recite the pledge. The recitation is the sign of allegiance. Now, here's the thing. You, as an individual, even as a under 18 member of our society, you can choose to recite none or a portion of the pledge as desired. If you personally don't want to say the under God portion of the pledge, you don't have to. Now, you simply don't say it. You simply omit it. You're actually not allowed to change the words according to the flag code. So what did I mean by removing non-religious dress, or non-religious headdresses? So there are points that will strictly violate established religions, okay? And if that is the case, an established religion, not a brand new one that just popped up 2 weeks ago, or something that you're claiming is true for you personally. Though that actually might get some traction these days. But generally, it's an established religious principle, and if it violates those rules will not be enforced. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses and flag idolatry. One of the hallmarks of Jehovah's Witnesses is their aberration, not aberration. They're very careful about idolatry in any way, shape, or form. And so if you've ever known one, they typically don't attend things like birthday parties, celebrate certain holidays, because they're worried that that's going to turn into some form of idolatry, which is something that their religion views as a very bad thing and is to be avoided at all costs. And so they don't do those things. The Pledge of Allegiance falls under their definition of idolatry, because the thing that you stand up and you're pledging allegiance to. And in that religion, that is not okay. It's an established religion, and this Pledge of Allegiance strictly violates those principles, and so that's not enforced. No one's going to make a Jehovah's Witness pledge allegiance to the flag. Certain turbans of certain religions, for example, Sikh turbans. In that religion, there is a very strong idea that you're not allowed to show your bare head under the sun, and so that's why men cover their head with turbans. You never see them without turbans because that's part of their religion. And as you can see here, there's a picture of a turban being put on, and it's. I mean, they're very good at it, but at this point they have a lot of practice. But it's not a simple thing to remove, like a ball cap, something that you just put on, take off, and it's no big deal. These take a little bit of work and time to put on, and also they're not supposed to show the tops of their heads, and so that would strictly violate an established religious code, and so that's not enforced. No one's going to make someone take off their turban for the Pledge of Allegiance. Also, older hats, older women's hats. You might not know this, but maybe your grandparents might. These older time hats, they're actually, a lot of them were actually pinned into the hair, and they weren't functional. They wouldn't simply sit on the top of your head and stay there. They would just fall off. And so they were actually pinned into the hairdo. It was kind of an extension of the hairdo, in fact. And so if you've ever seen one of these kind of highly convoluted hairdos that has a lot of pins in it and a lot of hairspray, you know that takes a long time to get done. And to remove one of these caps is actually a somewhat intense job. And so you can go back to older footage, maybe in the 30s and 40s and in the 50s, especially at baseball games. People are standing saluting the flag for the Star-Spangled Banner. You'll see women with these old-time hats still on. Okay, and that's not a big deal because it was recognized that was an issue for these women. They weren't trying to be disrespectful. It was just very difficult to get these hats off, and so that was allowed. So what's the point of the Pledge of Allegiance? Why do we say it? Well, we say it to reaffirm, to reflect, and to remember. Well, what are we reaffirming? What are we reflecting on? What are we trying to remember? That's going to be different for every person. Okay, I can't tell you what needs to be reaffirmed. I can't tell you what you need to reflect on and what you need to remember. But I'm guessing that there is something of great value in your life or in your family's life that you want to reaffirm, maybe some sort of moral code, value system, to reflect on what has come before you, okay, the things that have gone into allowing you to be the way you are today. And then to remember certain things. Typically, most people are referring to sacrifices when they talk about things like remembering, but I can't tell you what to do here, but this is a great time to do that if you're able to do that. But what are your rights? You have the right to pass, okay, meaning not participate in the Pledge of Allegiance, and you have the right to participate, but there are specific things you do in each of those situations. For example, if you want to participate, one, you stand, you place your right hand over your heart, the salute, you face the flag, and then you recite the pledge out loud. Okay, if you're going to participate, you do these things. This is the proper way to participate. This is the proper way to participate according to the flag code. Now, if you're going to pass, you stand silently, and you do not salute. So what this means is, in order to show respect to the institution from which you are, gaining an education here, free and appropriate public education, out of a sign of respect, stand. You don't have to salute. You don't have to recite the pledge. Okay, no one's going to make you do that. I'm going to ask that you stand, though, simply to show respect. You do not have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. You can remain silent. You don't have to recite certain portions if you don't want to, but you still need to show respect to the institution. So let's check for understanding. So who composed the Pledge of Allegiance? Was it Frank the Tank? Was it George Washington? Was it Obama? Or Francis Bellamy? It was Francis Bellamy. What year was the salute used and the Pledge of Allegiance changed from the Bellamy Salute? What year? Was it 1892? Was it 1776? Was it 1942? Or was it 1954? It was 1942, because remember, that Roman salute looks a lot like the Nazi salute. When were the Nazis about? 1940s, World War II. What event motivated officials to change the Bellamy Salute to the current salute? Was it World War I? World War II? Was it the Civil War? Or was it the Revolutionary War? It was World War II. In what year was the phrase, "under God," added to the pledge? Was it 1892? Was it 1776? Was it 1942? Or was it 1954? It was 1954, because this is the beginning of the Cold War era, okay, and it's capitalism versus communism here. Which of the following are you not required to do in class with regard to the pledge? Which are you not required to do? Recite the pledge, remove non-religious headdress, stand, or face the flag? Which are you not required to do? You are not required to recite the pledge. So what we've done hopefully here, what you can do hopefully at the end of this presentation, explain the meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance, summarize the origin of the Pledge of Allegiance, and then list the procedure for reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, as well as describing the point of the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, I will see you next period.